We are in chapter 11 on the pandemic. We've touched on, because there's so much more, but we've touched on the harm to society brought by the lockdowns, universal masking, and the vaccine mandates. And this time we're going to just scratch the surface about how our society was transformed through the process. We were divided into groups. It was pro-masking versus anti-maskers, pro-vaccine mandate versus anti-vaxxers. We learned well and approached everyone with suspicion. It did not surprise me when guns were drawn or people were beaten down. Anger and hostility were commonplace. Family members were pitted against each other. Friends stopped talking to one another. And this was supposed to be the new normal we should all expect. And that is when I realized the overall result, intended or not, of all the pandemic mitigation measures was ultimate isolation of individuals and the complete destruction of American society. Societal transformation. The Sociology Dictionary explains it this way. Whereas a society is composed of people, a culture is composed of ideas, behavior, and material possessions. Society and culture are interdependent. Neither could exist without the other, end quote. If society breaks down, so does the culture. If the culture is destroyed, so is the society. And that is where we find ourselves in the American experiment. I get asked why I think the American experiment is over. Our culture was founded upon natural law and the primary value of freedom. Our society was made up of people who agreed upon these things, behaved accordingly, and who understood the role of government as protecting these things and protecting the people within the society itself. But we have rejected natural law, and our government is not protecting our rights and freedoms, and it is not protecting its people from threats to their physical safety. I know there are those who will argue that is exactly what they were trying to do with the pandemic mitigation measures, linking public safety, a very everyone kind of security from physical threats, to this idea of health, which in its very nature is individualistic. My health and my body, and thus my personal health needs, are completely independent from the next person's. Public health is an oxymoron unless we are talking about the health of the culture, the health of the society, how well we are living together. But by linking personal health to the common good, taking away personal responsibility for our own health, and instead linking it to the common good, our government has actually destroyed the health of society. And our government has further rejected natural law and wants common understanding and common values. We have come undone. The American experiment is over. When we look at society as describing a group of people with a common culture, customs, and lifestyle within the framework of community, that is indeed our civilization, the one resting on top of the two crumbling pillars. Society is the total sum of interdependent relations, the framework through which individuals make decisions and take actions. It is, quote, the total complex of human relationships insofar as they grow out of action, end quote. In other words, the term society refers to the entire range of people's activities, people living with other people in all facets the way they do. I spent a lot more time on this in black and white, but it is important here too. So we're going to sit on this idea of civil society for a minute. Civil society includes all natural associations like the family, as well as all voluntary associations like church or synagogue congregations, community clubs, sports teams, private businesses, and charities. Involvement in civil society focuses on the voluntary nature of the relationship. Basically, except for your family, which eventually does in practice become voluntary, membership or participation in these associations or organizations is completely voluntary. You can choose to go to church or to join the community softball league. These voluntary associations then provide values, meaning, purpose, and a sense of belonging to individuals who are participating in them. Think about it. If you've ever been a member of any voluntary organization, you know things like athletic teams and congregations and clubs all give meaning, purpose, and a sense of belonging to those who are members of them. And in providing meaning and purpose, these voluntary associations can also be seen as sources of moral authority. We're going to come back to this idea of moral authority in part 3 of the book, but I want you to keep it in the forefront of your mind as we finish up this chapter. When these sources of meaning and purpose are stripped from individuals through lockdowns, when these sources of moral authority are shut down, when opportunities for relationships with local vendors and small businesses are eliminated, when the free market is no longer free, when friendships and family ties are broken, when empathy and love of our fellow man are replaced with suspicion and hostility, this necessarily creates a society adrift without values and purpose. But with the people still looking for those values and purpose and the community they lost. But the community is lost. And this is where we see the fear of individuals exploited as the American people destroy the fabric of their own society from within. The pandemic caused major disruption and disconnection in all avenues of society, especially the voluntary associations, as our freedom to associate was forcefully taken from us. But it also uncovered the already frayed state of our society. The fabric was already frayed due to all the aforementioned attacks on it, among many, many others. Social anxiety and desperation were already reaching their pinnacles. The pandemic ostensibly gave Americans the opportunity to point to something outside themselves and identify that as an object for their modern anxiety. And the pandemic mitigation measures provided a strategy to deal with the object of their anxiety. Stripped of actual community, people started connecting themselves to one another in the collective battle against the object of their anxiety, COVID-19. Engaged in a collective battle against that object of their anxiety, they found the new social bond they were lacking and seeking out. But the people were never truly connected to each other. Instead, each person was separately connected to the collective. And this is indeed how democracy is supposed to work, and why I hammered home at the beginning of this project that we do not want to live in a democracy. What we had during the pandemic was what we can expect a democracy to look like. It was democracy in action. But the people were never truly connected to each other. Instead, each person was separately connected to the collective, resulting in everyone demanding everyone else sacrifice all individual interests for the benefit of the collective. And we are back to the misery of Rousseau's democracy spoken of in part 1. There may be loads of unhappy, isolated individuals, but as members of the collective body, they are all happy, because the energy once used to form bonds between individuals is now invested in the bond between the individual and the collective, allowing the collective to act in unity. And with moral authority absent everywhere else, the individuals voluntarily look to the government for direction in how to benefit the whole. Anyone who acts outside the collective is seen as attempting to harm the collective, which is why the general will is necessarily good, and anyone who disagrees with it is the corrupt one. Virtue signaling is a real thing. There are those who do see it as a bad thing, but those who engage in it, you have to understand this, they don't see it as a bad thing. They see the unwillingness to signal one's virtue as evidence that such a person has no virtue. The one not virtue signaling is the one fundamentally opposed to the collective good and thus the real enemy of society. This is why they had no problem calling out non-maskers or turning in their neighbors. But we also have to understand that if there are two sides, this is democracy, remember? Both sides want to impose their values on the other side. But when we are grounded in innumerable voluntary associations made up of individuals with shared values, the freedom to participate in these civil society opportunities should be something all the people can agree upon. But this replacement of voluntary associations held together by voluntary actions and common values, replacement of that with forced actions based upon collective sacrifice of individual liberties for the greater good, means in practice that civil society has been replaced by political society, or by the state, or by the sovereign, or by the government. Where civil society is spontaneous, no one sets it up, as it is a self-ordering network, in that those who are participating in it pursue their own goals and purposes. Political society, and remember, society equals the actions of the people living together. Political society is directed by government dictate. Where civil society is based upon voluntary association, voluntary actions, personal preferences, and diverse goals, political society is based on uniform goals, uniform methods to achieve those goals, and coercion into following the strategy laid out by the government to achieve those goals. The pandemic pounded the final nail into the coffin in which American society lay. The mitigation measures and Americans' adherence to them for the greater good revealed how tenuous our civil society truly was, or still is. The demand for others to mask up or get vaccinated to protect others was not logically sound. Why should I trust you to protect me when you are unwilling to do whatever it takes to protect yourself by counting on me to protect you through my actions? Why should you rely on my actions to ensure your protection? What happened to individual responsibility? We saw the transformation unfold rather quickly, where everyone was demanding everyone else sacrifice all individual interests for the benefit of the collective. This mentality was only possible because government first eliminated all the sources of authentic connection, relationship, and moral authority, and all isolated individuals with their free-floating anxiety were desperate to try to control the uncontrollable. And make no mistake, that is what is at stake. We are being asked in the long term to relinquish individual liberty and individual pursuits and individual happiness for the greater good, achievable only if we hand over power and authority to an entity capable of controlling life and death itself, capable of perfecting society. That is the final destination of eliminating the loom upon which the fabric was made, while simultaneously pulling every thread free from the fabric of our country, pounding cracks in both pillars. We cannot build utopia while the flawed civilization, based on liberty, equality, and the individual pursuit of happiness, is still standing.